I was a prison guard, but after the warden's daughter got involved with inmates, he spiraled. He blackmailed me, threatened my family, and ruined my reputation. So I flipped the script and destroyed his entire life from the inside out. My former profession was that of a correctional officer. One particular day, the facility's warden decided it would be beneficial to bring his 10-year-old daughter to the premises, allowing her to observe his workplace. He briefly left her unattended in his office, and during that short interval, she ventured out. Approximately 10 minutes later, he discovered her in one of the hallways, severely injured with a head wound and her trousers unfastened. Witnessing him cradle her against his chest, clutching her inert form, and murmuring, "Daddy's got you, darling," for what felt like endless hours, is an image indelibly etched in my memory. From that harrowing instant, he became consumed by the relentless pursuit of her assailant. He forewent any leave, returning to work the very next morning without a wink of sleep, dedicating the entire day to intense questioning of every inmate and officer. He extended offers of financial incentives, reduced incarceration periods, and exclusive benefits, desperate for any shred of intelligence. I recall observing his emotional collapse between interrogations, followed by him repeatedly striking his head against the wall, seeking physical agony to momentarily suppress the profound emotional anguish, just long enough to proceed with the subsequent interview. He gathered all individuals whose responses he deemed suspect, intimidating them with threats of isolated detention, physical assaults, and dismissal for the guards. He even resorted to compelling an inmate to wear a concealed recording device during recreation time, in the hope of capturing a confession, warning the prisoner of an additional 2 years to his term if he refused. Regrettably, his initial inquiries yielded no conclusive information, prompting him to adopt increasingly severe measures. 2.5 weeks following the tragic incident, he arrived at work heavily intoxicated and seized me by the shoulders, declaring that day marked the commencement of the ultimate reckoning. Subsequently, he assembled all the prisoners and proclaimed that until the perpetrator's identity was revealed, their sustenance would be rationed to every other day. The ensuing uproar was fierce, and the warden interpreted the protests as an indication of culpability among those who spoke out. He apprehended everyone who defied his directive and commanded us, the guards, to physically assault them. Some officers, myself included, felt deep reluctance and resisted. However, he jeopardized our employment, asserting, "If we hesitate, it implies one of us may have harmed his daughter." He would traverse the prison grounds daily, either in a state of intoxication or under the influence, pounding on random cell doors to tearfully plead for someone to disclose who had taken his child. When this approach proved ineffective, he began menacing the prisoner's offspring. He would summon the inmates he deemed most suspicious to his office and graphically detail his external connections and the potential harm he could inflict upon their families should they fail to confess. Predictably, this strategy cultivated a profound animosity towards him among the prisoners, with one particular inmate even lunging at the warden within the office. That inmate ultimately sustained a stab wound to the arm and had 5 years appended to his sentence. Yet, that was not even the most dreadful aspect. You see, the warden perceived this inmate's defiance as an unequivocal admission of guilt. Consequently, the inmate, Jeremiah, was brought back to the warden's office a few days later. No one saw Jeremiah again for the subsequent days, leading us all to presume he had simply been placed in solitary confinement or a similar punitive measure. However, one day, while en route to retrieve coffee, I discerned screams emanating from the subterranean passages below. I descended to investigate, and the further I pursued the sound, the more unsettling it became, unlike anything I had ever conceived. I recall approaching the door from which the cries originated, and through a narrow crevice, I could perceive it. The warden had Jeremiah bound to a chair. He was subjecting him to acts of horror movie caliber, incessantly demanding Jeremiah confess his involvement. A table laden with instruments lay beside him, featuring everything from pliers to blades, blowtorches, and even a buzzsaw. It was the most horrifying spectacle I had ever witnessed. Jeremiah already lacked 2 fingers, and his body bore numerous lacerations. I froze, but before my conscious mind could formulate a decision, I began pounding on the door. I observed the warden halt abruptly. He slowly approached the door, appearing disheveled and frenzied. He seemed to be under the influence of every potent substance simultaneously, having endured weeks without sleep, and his eyes held the vacant stare of a madman. I shouted, demanding an explanation for his actions, and he shrieked back that Jeremiah deserved retribution. I countered that he had no certainty of Jeremiah's culpability. It was then that he fell silent. I heard footsteps, then witnessed him returning to Jeremiah, where he commenced pouring salt into the open wounds, screaming at him to confess. I struck the already compromised door with greater force, my fist aching as the aged lock rattled but remained steadfast. The warden's voice ascended above Jeremiah's agonizing wails, shrieking "Confess!" repeatedly. The sound of liquid splashing, followed by an inhuman cry, indicated he was applying more salt to the injuries. Then, abruptly, an eerie silence descended. I heard footsteps approaching the door, slow and deliberate. The warden's breathing was heavy through the crack, and when he finally spoke, his voice was hushed and controlled, delivered through clenched teeth. "How long have you been standing there?" My throat became parched. I attempted to fabricate a story, stammering that I had just arrived, having merely heard something peculiar, but he abruptly interrupted me with a harsh laugh. "You called me a psychopath 5 minutes ago. I overheard everything." Behind him, Jeremiah's whimpers grew fainter, more desperate. I noticed the warden's hand clutching something metallic behind the door, keeping it concealed from my view. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Peterson rounded the corner, coffee cup in hand, adhering to his customary morning routine. He paused upon seeing me pressed against the restricted access door. "What's transpiring down here?" My heart pounded. This presented my opportunity to reveal everything, to seek assistance. But then I recalled that Peterson's daughter attended school with the warden's surviving children. The entire prison community was intertwined in ways that rendered every choice intricate. I steadied my voice and informed Peterson there was a situation, but I had it under control. He needed to return upstairs. He hesitated, glancing between me and the door, but eventually shrugged and retraced his steps. Jeremiah's moans weakened behind the door. If I did not act swiftly, he might not survive the warden's actions. The door opened slightly. The warden's face materialized in the aperture, splattered with blood, his eyes wild, yet somehow calculating. He spoke calmly, which was, in a way, more unsettling than his screaming. "You can join me, or you can depart. But if you depart, you were never here." 3 realizations struck me simultaneously. My key card logs indicated my presence in this restricted zone when I should not have been. The security cameras that typically monitored every inch of the prison were inexplicably deactivated in this corridor. And in the warden's visible hand, he clutched a bloodied pair of pliers. Self-preservation took hold. I recoiled from the door, my legs trembling. The warden observed my retreat, then added, "Consult the morning schedule. You are assigned to assist me with a special undertaking in an hour." The implication was unmistakable. He had accounted for potential witnesses. I stumbled back to the break room, my hands shaking so uncontrollably that I could not steady the coffee cup. Hot liquid spilled over my fingers, but I scarcely registered it. Around me, other guards conversed about their weekends, and I overheard Daniels remarking that the warden seemed more composed today, more focused. They had no inkling of the horror unfolding 50 feet beneath them. My phone vibrated. A text message from my spouse inquiring about my well-being, concerned because I had missed dinner once more. She mentioned my phone had depleted its battery for the 3rd time this month, and I truly needed to acquire a new one. Normal life persisted while atrocity transpired in the basement. I accessed the personnel files on the breakroom computer, needing to ascertain more about Jeremiah. His record indicated 15 years for armed robbery, multiple internal infractions, including 3 altercations, and suspected contraband trafficking. The other guards already harbored distrust towards him. The warden had meticulously selected his victim, someone who would not be missed or readily believed. The main entrance buzzed, and the head of the prison board unexpectedly entered. My stomach plummeted, but he merely smiled and shook hands with the day shift supervisor, commending the warden's management of recent disciplinary matters. He mentioned conducting a routine inspection of the facilities. I observed him walk past the entrance to the restricted area, entirely oblivious that torture was occurring just 50 feet below. The prison chaplain appeared at the warden's office door, holding documents requiring signatures for the memorial service. The warden would be compelled to ascend, to portray the grieving father publicly while Jeremiah bled in the basement. The thought sickened me. My hands began to tremble again, worse than before. The sounds from the basement had awakened something profound, resurrecting memories from my military deployment. Collins noticed and placed a hand on my shoulder, remarking that I looked rough. "Just like when you returned from Afghanistan," he stated. "This entire situation with the warden's daughter has unsettled everyone." My phone buzzed with a notification. The warden had established a new messaging group for all guards, titled Safety Updates. But as I watched officers being added and their red receipts appearing, I grasped the true purpose of this group. He was monitoring who was active, who was responsive, who remained neutral versus who supported him. I attempted to return downstairs to check on Jeremiah, but discovered new security protocols had been implemented overnight. My key card no longer granted access to that area. When I inquired about it, the desk sergeant simply shrugged and stated the warden had enacted necessary modifications following the tragedy. Everyone supported him. Who would question a bereaved father's desire for heightened security? Throughout the day, I observed the warden engaging with staff during shift change. His sorrow had bestowed upon him a unique form of authority. The administrative personnel now informally consulted him before endorsing any guard requests. When I sought to adjust my schedule, the secretary asked if I had cleared it with the warden first. He had constructed a subtle power structure through calamity. By evening, I could barely function. I had not slept, haunted by the sounds from the basement. During the shift change briefing, I fumbled my words, confusing assignments. The arriving guards exchanged glances, likely surmising I had been drinking. My partner, Thompson, pulled me aside after the briefing. We had collaborated for 5 years, covering for each other countless times, but now his expression was stern. "I cannot continue this," he stated. "Either report him or transfer out, but I will not jeopardize my employment over your conscience." That night, the local news broadcast a favorable report about the warden's fortitude amidst tragedy. The reporter interviewed him at his daughter's preferred playground, discussing how the prison community had rallied in support. The comments section filled with encouraging messages from guards' families. My own mother shared the article on social media, commending that unfortunate man's resilience. The following morning, I learned Jeremiah had been transferred to medical isolation under suicide watch. Only the warden, medical personnel, and specifically assigned guards could access him. The bandages on his hands and the contusions on his arms were concealed from general view. Rodriguez located me during lunch break. We had been companions since training. Our children played together. He appeared uncomfortable as he confessed his son had applied for the criminal justice program at State College. He required the warden's letter of recommendation. The unspoken message was unambiguous. Do not compel him to choose between our friendship and his son's prospects. I then comprehended the extent of my predicament. To substantiate that Jeremiah had been subjected to torture rather than attempting self-harm would necessitate revealing my unauthorized presence in a restricted area. Every potential action I might undertake had been foreseen. At 2 a.m., I proceeded to the restroom and discovered the warden at the sink, cleansing blood from his uniform. He looked up upon my entry, offered that chilling smile, and stated simply, "Jeremiah had another episode." We stood there, a silent understanding passing between us. He knew that I knew. I knew that he would ruin me if I spoke. This was no longer about rectitude or veracity. This had evolved into a strategic contest, and I was already 3 moves behind. The warden's psychological campaign commenced in earnest. The subsequent week, I ascertained he had begun attending the same grief support group as my widowed sister-in-law, Sarah. She mentioned it casually during Sunday dinner, remarking on how this kind man who had lost his daughter had been sending her supportive biblical verses via text. My blood ran cold when she displayed the messages. He was quoting her late husband's cherished passages, information he could only have procured from personnel files. My wife observed my distress that night. I attempted to elucidate the torture, what I had witnessed in the basement. She frowned, confusion clouding her face. She stated I had told her something different yesterday, that I had heard rumors, not directly observed anything. We both realized the strain was impairing my memory, rendering me an unreliable witness, even to my own kin. The next morning brought another setback. While seeking leverage, I located my own past incident reports within the filing system. 3 years prior, I had authored a commendation praising the warden's firm but equitable disciplinary methods after he had managed an inmate uprising. My own words. My own signature documenting support for his severe treatment of prisoners. He had retained copies, naturally. My son returned home from school that afternoon with tears in his eyes. The warden's surviving 8-year-old had informed him during recess that his father had said my father was unwell and might harm people. The psychological conflict had reached our children. I watched my boy's bewildered expression as I attempted to explain that sometimes adults hold differing opinions on significant matters. I retrieved the breakroom security footage from the night I uncovered the torture. The camera showed me entering the restricted area, my timestamp clear, but the angle did not capture the corridor leading to the torture room, a standard blind spot known to every guard. The footage proved my unauthorized presence, but revealed nothing of what I had witnessed. The prison psychologist summoned me for a mandatory assessment. She noted my exhaustion and trauma response following the child's demise, suggesting I take medical leave. Her report would document my obsessive preoccupation with the warden. Another strategic maneuver against me. Late one night, I recalled observing the warden input his computer password during more pleasant times. I attempted variations of his daughter's name at an unattended terminal, hoping to discover incriminating evidence. The system locked me out after 3 attempts, and I knew it would log the failed access attempts by morning. Studying the shift logs, I discerned a pattern. The warden's special undertakings in the basement coincided perfectly with his daughter's favorite television program schedule, from 7 to 8 p.m. He was torturing Jeremiah during the time he used to spend watching animated shows with her. The prison counselor pulled me aside after our mandated session. Policy mandated her to report any troubling statements about colleagues to administration. My accusations against the warden would be documented as potential indicators of psychological instability. I endeavored to record the warden at his daughter's memorial service, hoping grief might prompt a confession. He immediately noticed my phone, pausing mid-eulogy, his voice carrying across the hushed congregation as he inquired if I was still attempting to make this about myself. Every head turned to gaze at me. I pocketed the phone, my face burning with mortification. The shift change protocols meant I had to depart each day without confirming Jeremiah's continued survival. The uncertainty overwhelmed me. Was he recuperating? Was the torment persisting? The lack of knowledge became its own form of suffering. My union representative met with me in the parking lot, away from prison cameras. He listened to my account, then shook his head. Even if it were true, he explained, no one would credit that a grieving father had transformed into a monster. He had his own family to safeguard, his own livelihood to consider. Another ally lost. I began to perceive subtle details. The warden now wore his daughter's Minnie Mouse timepiece, occupying her preferred seat in the cafeteria during lunch. Other guards interpreted it as a poignant homage to his lost child. They did not discern the calculated performance I was witnessing. He approached me privately with an offer, a transfer to the day shift with a pay increase if I would concentrate on healing and moving forward. The words were meticulously chosen. Accept the inducement or face the repercussions. I declined, striving to preserve some semblance of integrity. My assignments immediately became the most arduous possible, night shifts in the most perilous wings, paired with inexperienced guards who could offer no support. Thompson formally requested a new partner. I was being systematically isolated. While scrutinizing security footage for any corroboration, I made a startling discovery. Another prisoner, Marcus, appeared in the corridor just 5 minutes before the daughter was found. However, Marcus had been on the lockdown roster that day, a list controlled by the warden. He had never been interviewed because, officially, he could not have been present. The warden and I both grasped something critical. His daughter's tablet, still in the evidence locker, might contain photographs or videos from that day, but it was protected by a passcode, known only to her. We were both contemplating the same possibility. What undisclosed information did that device conceal? My attempted substantiation crumbled when the prison physician clarified Jeremiah's injuries to investigators. The wounds were consistent with his documented history of self-inflicted harm from prior facilities. The medical records corroborated the suicide watch narrative. Every avenue I pursued had been foreseen and obstructed. My mother telephoned that evening, her voice strained. She attended the same church grief support group as the warden's mother, Gloria. She was torn between believing her son and abandoning a friend in her deepest anguish. I could discern her choice in her voice before she articulated it. She would support both families, but could not provide funds for any legal action I might pursue. Desperation compelled me to adopt the warden's own methods. I began fabricating inmate grievances, hoping to trigger an external inquiry. I drafted reports about unsettling sounds from restricted areas, backdating them to appear credible. I was becoming the very thing I had vowed to oppose. I orchestrated an accidental encounter with a state inspector at a gas station. While purchasing coffee, I casually alluded to the unusual injury patterns I had been observing among inmates. I planted seeds of doubt, watching them take root in the inspector's expression. The warden had instructed me well. Sometimes the indirect approach proved more effective than direct accusations. Before the warden recognized my actions, I screenshotted the employee complaint system. Multiple guards had reported disturbing sounds from restricted areas over the past weeks. Their reports had been marked as reviewed and resolved by the warden himself. Proof of a recurring pattern. Finally, the daughter's teacher contacted me privately. She disclosed that the child had seemed apprehensive about visiting the prison, though excited about the promised ice cream afterward. Normal childhood apprehension, nothing that foreshadowed what would transpire, but it added another dimension to the tragedy. My investigation consumed everything. I missed my son's school play while conducting surveillance outside the prison, attempting to document the warden's movements. My wife texted me a photograph of the vacant seat beside her. The disappointment in her message was palpable without words. Legal consultation depleted our savings. The attorney explained the immense difficulty of proving anything without Jeremiah's testimony. Meanwhile, the warden received paid administrative leave for grief counseling. The system protected its own. Everything erupted at the memorial playground dedication. Surrounded by grieving families, I could no longer restrain myself. I publicly accused the warden, my words spilling out in a desperate torrent. Children wept, parents pulled their families away. The scene devolved into pandemonium, traumatizing the very individuals we were meant to be honoring. The suspension came immediately, without pay, pending a psychological evaluation. The assessment was scheduled with Dr. Harrison, the warden's golf companion. Another move in the strategic game. Another piece positioned against me. I relocated to my brother's basement, my marriage hanging by a thread. The warden, conversely, received casseroles and sympathy from the community. The disparity was evident to all. My wife's ultimatum arrived during one of my brief visits home. Either obtain proof or seek help, but cease destroying our family for a mere possibility. The anguish in her eyes was more severe than any physical torment. Our family was becoming collateral damage in my pursuit of justice. My investigation led to the suspension of an innocent janitor, Martinez. The cleaning log showed him near the torture room during the times I had identified. He had committed no wrongdoing, merely been in the wrong place at the wrong time. His daughter inquired why her father could no longer afford her school supplies. Martinez's wife confronted me at the grocery store. Her words cut deeply. I was as culpable as the warden, ruining families for my obsession. I yearned to explain, to make her comprehend. But how could I? She was correct. I was inflicting harm upon blameless individuals. I persisted nonetheless. The greater good, I told myself. Exposing torment mattered more than one family's temporary hardship. But the justification felt hollow as I observed Martinez's family struggling. Williams, the last guard who had offered me any support, posed a question that shook my moral certainty. What if Jeremiah had assaulted her? What if he deserved what was happening? I could not immediately refute the logic, and that terrified me more than anything. During therapy, I made an admission that haunted me. Early in my career, I had disregarded prisoner abuse, looking the other way when a colleague became overly aggressive. The pattern was clear. I had always been a craven individual when it mattered most. Reviewing shift logs for my defense, I discovered something incriminating. I had been assigned to an entirely different wing that day. I was not supposed to be anywhere near that corridor. By pursuing the sounds of torture, I had violated protocol. The daughter had transgressed rules by wandering, and I had transgressed them by investigating. The prison board scheduled an emergency review of the warden's conduct, but it was set for the following day, granting him a full night to obliterate evidence. My lawyer was in another state, attending to a family emergency. The timing felt meticulously orchestrated. In a private moment, the warden disclosed his true impetus. He cared not if Jeremiah was genuinely culpable. Someone had to atone for his failure to safeguard his daughter. Jeremiah's criminal history rendered him unsympathetic, the ideal target for his fury. It was not about justice. It was about needing someone to cast blame upon. The deeper truth gradually surfaced. The warden's own sister had been victimized by a predator during their childhood. The perpetrator was never apprehended. The cycle of aggression had commenced decades prior. Trauma begetting trauma across generations. I then made a choice that challenged the honest officer within me. Utilizing a sample of the daughter's blood from evidence, I marked some of the torture instruments in the basement. I planted evidence to ensure the investigation would uncover something. Every principle I had held sacred perished in that moment. I became calculating, manipulative. I bribed a commissary worker to report that Jeremiah had expressed fearful comments about the room downstairs. I created a paper trail that had not existed previously. The warden had transformed me into his reflection. When the review board finally voiced apprehensions about the warden's behavior, the triumph felt hollow. I observed him at his daughter's grave that evening, sobbing uncontrollably. We were both shattered individuals, destroyed by the same tragedy in disparate ways. The warden's counterattack was brilliant. He asserted I harbored a persecution complex and a hero fantasy, attempting to insert myself into his family's misfortune. The board found his psychological assessment of me compelling. After all, what grieving father would have leisure for torture while arranging his daughter's funeral? Everything hinged on Jeremiah's testimony, but weeks of torment had psychologically devastated him. He flinched at anyone's approach. He could not form coherent sentences. The key witness was useless, irrevocably broken. The warden's son approached me at school pickup. I had assisted him with homework years ago, and he still bore my old police badge sticker on his backpack. His question was straightforward and crushing. Why are you trying to hurt my daddy? I had no response a child could comprehend. The guards fractured into factions. Some understood grief could propel a man to extremes. Others were appalled by the torture allegations. The prison became a battleground of whispers and furtive glances. The board's preliminary finding was predictable. Grief explains, but does not excuse. They would not pursue criminal charges without Jeremiah's testimony. Psychological torment was too challenging to substantiate, too easily dismissed as the delusions of a traumatized man. I called in my last favor, an old military comrade now employed in prison oversight. He was indebted to me. I had preserved his life in Kandahar. He pledged an independent investigation, a fresh perspective on the situation, but even favors have limitations. He could only proceed through established channels. The inquiry would span months, adhering to proper procedures, no special treatment, no expedited timeline. My final hope dissolved into bureaucracy. The investigation revealed something unforeseen through the daughter's teacher. She had maintained meticulous behavioral notes documenting how the child had become increasingly withdrawn following her grandfather's passing 6 months earlier. The entries showed a pattern. The daughter inquiring if sadness lasted perpetually when someone died, if her father would ever smile again. The teacher had filed a mandatory report the week prior to the murder, but it remained unprocessed in the backlog of social services paperwork. That conclusive evidence altered everything. The teacher's documentation proved the daughter had been living in apprehension, observing her father's grief consume him. She had remained silent to protect his reputation, prioritizing him over her own safety. The realization struck me like a physical blow. She died shielding him from himself. I made my decision then, despite knowing it would devastate the warden's remaining family. I committed to exposing the truth. The fabricated evidence I had created would ensure the investigation uncovered something, even if Jeremiah could not testify. My transformation into someone willing to manipulate evidence for the greater good was complete. The warden's therapy notes became pivotal when they were subpoenaed. His grief counselor's record showed he had described detailed interrogation fantasies during sessions, discussing compelling prisoners to confess to crimes. The therapist had documented concerns about therapeutic privilege, uncertain if the fantasies constituted genuine threats. The warden had unwittingly generated evidence against himself. I presented everything to the board without emotion, maintaining complete professional demeanor. The screenshots of employee complaints, the teacher's documentation, the therapy notes, all arranged chronologically. Across the table, the warden observed my actions, and I witnessed the moment he realized he had been outmaneuvered. His strategic game had failed because he had underestimated the lengths I would go to. The pattern of abuse became undeniable as more guards found the courage to come forward. They described witnessing the warden's escalating conduct, the threats against their employment if they reported anything. Each testimony added weight to the investigation. The prison's culture of silence finally fractured. Both sides prepared final evidence packages, while the board announced their decision would be conveyed through a written review rather than dramatic hearings. No courtroom theatrics, just administrative process grinding towards a resolution. The anticlimax felt fitting somehow. Bureaucracy resolving what violence had wrought. Review day arrived with the entire prison on edge. Guards congregated in the parking lot. Families sat together regardless of which side their spouses had chosen. Some wives brought coffee and sandwiches, transforming the vigil into an impromptu community gathering. The division between supporters and accusers blurred as everyone awaited answers. The physical toll was evident on both of us. The warden had shed 30 pounds, his hands constantly trembling. I was hardly better. The stress had aged me years and months. We passed each other in the hallway that morning. Two broken men destroyed by the same tragedy, neither speaking. The truth emerged through the board's written findings. They documented how grief had transmuted into madness, madness into torment, torment into institutional failure. The language was clinical, bureaucratic, but the conclusion was unequivocal. The system had failed at every level, from the warden down to officers like me, who had initially remained silent. The prison chaplain's statement proved decisive. He had provided written testimony that during a prayer session, the warden had confessed to exceeding limits with Jeremiah. The chaplain struggled with violating confidentiality, but ultimately determined he could not prevaricate, even for a grieving father. His moral fortitude underscored my own earlier timidity. The board mandated 3 actions: a criminal investigation into the warden's deeds, a compulsory psychiatric evaluation, and a federal review of the entire prison system. The administrative language could not obscure the magnitude of what they had unearthed. Decades of overlooked mistreatment had finally reached a critical juncture. My concealed phone recording was authenticated despite its inferior quality. Audio experts confirmed Jeremiah's screams and the warden's voice were identifiable. The recording would not be admissible in criminal court due to consent laws. But for employment action, it furnished irrefutable proof. Technology had captured what human witnesses had been too fearful to report. The evidence demonstrated torture while simultaneously revealing the warden's complete psychological collapse after his daughter's murder. The psychiatric evaluation indicated he genuinely believed Jeremiah was guilty despite a lack of evidence. His delusion was absolute. He had convinced himself torment would yield truth. The human mind's capacity for self-deception had enabled atrocity. The warden's breakdown during his final interview was complete. He railed about Jeremiah, about his daughter, about the conspiracy of guards shielding a child killer. Even confronted with evidence of Jeremiah's innocence, he could not accept it. His sorrow had forged an alternative reality where torture was justice. When offered the opportunity to speak at the administrative hearing, I faced a choice between retribution and compassion. A part of me desired maximum retribution, wanted him to suffer as Jeremiah had suffered, but Sarah's memory restrained me. She would not wish for more violence born from violence. I advocated for psychiatric intervention rather than maximum incarceration. The warden required assistance, not merely punishment. My recommendation focused on removing him from any position of authority while ensuring he received mental health treatment. The board appeared surprised by my moderation. The final determination was issued. The warden was removed from his post, permanently barred from correctional work, and ordered to a psychiatric facility for assessment and treatment. Criminal charges would be filed, but the emphasis would be on rehabilitation rather than pure punishment. It felt like the most favorable outcome possible from an impossible circumstance. The prison community divided between those acclaiming me courageous and those labeling me a betrayer who had abandoned a grieving father. Death threats arrived at my brother's residence. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid me. My family's safety became a constant preoccupation, necessitating relocation. We secured a small apartment 3 towns away. My wife had remained despite everything. Though our marriage bore deep scars, trust, once fractured, mends gradually. We attended counseling, processing the trauma that had permeated our entire family. Some days were more favorable than others. Securing employment proved arduous. My resume displayed 20 years in corrections, but the scandal pursued me. Applications went unanswered. Finally, a hardware store employed me for inventory management. The remuneration was half of what I had earned as a guard, but it was honest work devoid of moral compromise. Sleep remained elusive. At 3 a.m., I would awaken to phantom sounds of screaming. Therapy provided aid, but some wounds do not fully mend. The therapist stated trauma response was normal after what I had witnessed and perpetrated. Healing would require time I was uncertain I possessed. Jeremiah was released early due to wrongful imprisonment. The years of his sentence served during and after torture were vacated. He vanished immediately upon release. No forwarding address, no contact information. I hoped he found tranquility somewhere, though I doubted its possibility. The warden's surviving children entered intensive therapy. Reports filtered through mutual acquaintances regarding their struggles. The 8-year-old who had told my son I was unwell now contended with his own inner demons. Another generation marked by trauma, the cycle persisting despite our endeavors to disrupt it. Federal monitoring transformed the prison. New oversight protocols, mandatory reporting systems, independent review boards, all implemented to prevent future abuse. The guards who had remained silent faced retraining or termination. The culture of complicity gradually dissolved under external pressure. Martinez was reinstated with back pay after the investigation exonerated him. His wife never addressed me again, but I heard his daughter obtained her school supplies. Minor victories in an ocean of devastation. At least one innocent family had been restored. The daughter's murder remained unresolved. Marcus, the prisoner who had been in the corridor, was interrogated extensively, but no evidence linked him to the crime. The tablet never yielded its secrets. Sometimes there are no definitive answers, no closure, just an absence where a child should be. Justice materialized through institutional channels rather than dramatic confrontation. The warden received treatment while being held accountable. Jeremiah gained liberty, but not healing. The system changed incrementally. I preserved my integrity, but forfeited my career and community. Considering the final assessment, everyone incurred a loss. The warden lost his daughter, then his sanity, then his freedom. Jeremiah lost years and his psychological well-being. Martinez temporarily lost his livelihood. My family lost stability and community. The other guards lost their comfortable silence. But from those losses emerged necessary transformation. A corrupt system faced scrutiny. Misconduct was exposed and addressed. Future prisoners might experience greater safety because we had finally broken the silence. It was not the justice anyone desired, but it was what we accomplished. My son once inquired if I regretted my involvement. I conveyed the truth to him. I regretted not acting sooner. That initial day when I heard the screams and knocked on the door, I had prioritized protocol over intuition. Had I forced my way in, called for immediate backup, perhaps Jeremiah would have endured less suffering. The hardware store position became routine. Stocking shelves, verifying inventory, assisting customers in finding their needs. Simple tasks devoid of moral complexity. My colleagues were unaware of my past, and I did not disclose it. Sometimes anonymity serves as its own form of liberation. My wife and I rebuilt slowly. Trust developed through small gestures, showing up, fulfilling commitments, choosing transparency over secrecy. We would never be the individuals we once were, but perhaps we were evolving into something more resilient. Trauma had tested us, and we had endured, scarred but whole. The narrative concluded not with triumph, but with ordinary existence resuming after extraordinary horror. Justice was partial, healing incomplete, consequences ongoing. The warden received treatment, Jeremiah gained freedom, the prison underwent reform, and I received a second opportunity to embody the man I should have been from the outset. In the end, that had to suffice.